The Stone Carvers Guild podcast is a part of the Stone Carvers Guild organization, which is a fantastic organization. Don't y'all agree?
Oh, yeah, it's great. And it's cheap, too.
It's well worth the price of admission.
It is, for sure. You can find out how to become a general member at stonecarversguild.org. There's a Get Involved section. And I've been a member of the Stone Carvers Guild since its inception. It's been an unbelievable resource as far as the knowledge. How did you describe it, Joel?
Oh, it's a living library of knowledge that the stone carving world otherwise is sort of hard to break into if you are looking around for it. I'm a general member. I'm not a full-time stone carver, but I love it from kind of a hobbyist, part-time perspective, but looking to learn more, and found that through the Stone Carvers Guild, through its forum, and through being able to connect easily with other like-minded folks like Bethany and Matthew.
Yeah. So if you want to be a general member, it's just $40, and you would have access to the resources, which include the forum, and then you can log on and you could ask Matthew questions on the forum.
Or anyone else.
Or anyone else.
And also there's the annual meeting, which I just love because once a year, getting together and sharing stories is an unbelievable experience. And that's something that's also available to general members.
Attend a general meeting or even become a professional member, which has other benefits as well. You just have to go to stonecarversguild.org and click on Get Involved at the top.
Join today.
Welcome to the Stone Carvers Guild podcast. Here you will meet a variety of carvers working throughout North America. Drawing on our collective experience, we seek to share knowledge about this ancient art and to do our part to ensure that stone carving will play an important role in built environments for generations to come. So whether you are an experienced carver, new to the craft, or just curious, put on your safety goggles, open up your mind, and welcome to the workshop.
We haven't had a little pre-podcast chat in a while.
No, we haven't.
That's true.
Bethany's on the road for listeners.
Traveling stone carvers.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Matthew, since you're the one in this group that's had kind of the most stone carving experience, where's the most exotic location that you've traveled to carve rock?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Well, exotic.
Okay.
I don't know
How far
about
from
exotic.
home?
I've done work in Boston and Madison, some stuff in California.
Cool.
I traveled some. You know, it's kind of a solitary existence. I much prefer to carve in my shop than, going on the road. You have to take everything with you. I was looking at, there's some carving festivals that look interesting. There's one in Canada, actually, that one of our members, Sean Williams, participated in a few years ago. And I've been meaning to ask him how that was, because I would love an excuse to just go up to Toronto, or I think it's either in Montreal. Maybe it's in Montreal, or Montreal. I think that's how you say it.
I think there's one in Alabama too. I'm in Alabama right now, and I'm near I think it's called Sylacauga, and they have marble there, and I think they have a marble festival every spring, and I was eyeing it. It looks like fun, kind of like the Indiana Lime Symposium, maybe.
We do a lot of local carving festivals, like Stuart and Bob and I
really
participate in some annual ones, and they're always fun. You know, it's kind of it's not exactly like working in your shop because people are constantly asking you questions, but it's a lot of fun. You know, little short 2-day events, things like that. See what you can get done in 2 days.
So Vermont is pretty exotic.
It is, and that's where our guest today is from. Was that a segue, Bethany?
That was well done. A good job, guys.
It wasn't just go
super pro.
I love it.
Yeah, our guest today, Fred Brownstein, is from there. I don't know Fred really well. I do know that he is an incredible carver. And actually, he just won an award from the National Sculpture Society this year, and well-deserved award that they give to one artist every year. So I'm excited about our conversation with him.
Yeah, he's been working for a long time.
Yeah. I was really captured by this conversation, and the listeners will find this out. It'll kind of jump pretty quickly into a master class of how to use a pointing machine or some tips from a lifetime of carving. And Bethany, you've worked a little bit with Fred, sort of, in some capacity. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I visited his studio and got the extended and in-person version of what you're going to hear in this podcast. And it sounds like actually, and the Lime Academy is not paying us for this, but it sounds like he might be helping out to start a stone carving program at the Lime Academy. And they already do some workshops. So if people are interested in learning more along these lines, they could check out the Lime Academy is it Connecticut?
I think so. And I think he actually did over the summer. I think he did a course.
Right.
I saw on his website. So that would be I think it was a pretty quick little, a short little course, but I'm imagining that you learn quite a bit. He's definitely has a wealth of knowledge, that's for sure.
Though we're not being paid for this, we're not above being paid for it.
That's right. So if you're listening...
So Lime Academy, if you're listening.
You have our number.
Exactly.
I'm all right. And yourself?
Oh, good. Hey, I'm looking at your website, and it says that Vincenzo taught Fred to use the machinetta, and I'm in the middle of my first sort of large pointing project, and I'm tearing my hair out. And I really wish you were here, because you could probably tell me how to do it, and I have nobody to help me.
Wow.
Yeah.
We need to help you, teach you with that, but the machinetta, it takes a little time and practice to really learn, to tell you the truth. But you already know about the carving part, so just learning the machinetta it's the principle is really easy, of course, but the practice is something else again. If you want to come visit me in the studio, I'll help you out with it.
Seriously? Yes.
Bethany, I'm curious, like what's your struggle? Just if you could elaborate
my
on
struggle
that.
is that it's taking me 5 million years, and I don't know.
Welcome to stone carving.
I mean, there's just so many decisions to make in terms of like what to measure and what not to measure, and how many points to make, and whatever I'm doing, it's incredibly inefficient. Yeah.
Well, the first thing, you have to set it up, right? I mean, you could send me some pictures and I could probably help you over the email, just giving you some suggestions. But once you set it up with the 3 points and a cross, then the fourth point, is at the end of the pointer on the machinetta. So just start out first of all, you want to check and make sure that the piece fits in the block.
Right.
And use the machinetta to do that. Make sure you have plenty of room.
Uh-huh.
And then start like you would on anything. It's the point on the stone that's closest to you, the farthest out point.
Okay.
Let's say you're doing a face, right?
Yeah.
If the nose is the first closest to you, then that's where you start.
Okay.
1 point on the nose, 1 point on the forehead, 1 point on the chin, just 3 points, and you begin to cut the biggest planes on the highest points of the skull.
Okay.
And that's where you begin. And then it goes from there. The question of how many points do you need? The points are guides for your eye.
Okay.
What they are. So you only need as many as your personal needs are, depending on what you're carving. So they guide you. So once you have your measurements up there and your points up there, you just look at it, do it.
When you get those first points, Fred, do you leave yourself a little, like, do you back off a little bit, or do you go straight to the point?
Oh, no, not at all. When you rough it out, whenever you rough out, if you have the material, and you should, you want to leave roughing out with the point, not the pointing machine. not the machinetta, but the point, the tool.
Right.
You leave what we call one finger, and one finger is the distance on your first finger from the end of your finger to your first knuckle, right?
Oh, wow.
That distance, about an inch or so. So when you rough out, you set yourself up to rough the whole piece out, all the big pieces that come off and everything else. So you rough the whole thing out within leaving that much. That's your first pass over the stone. And then your second pass is done. And you can use the machinetta to do that. You just set it, you just leave the material there. There's two ways to do it. One, you can just put your finger in between. You can leave the distance on the machinetta, so when it goes all the way down, you already have that much. Or when you set the stop, you can set it there. So even though you set the point on the machinetta all the way down to the stone, when you see that your stop is going to hit there, you leave that much distance.
Oh, okay.
I tend to go ahead and set the machinetta accurately where I want it. In other words, if I want to leave a finger's worth of stone, that's where I set it. I'll leave the airspace in between the point on the machinetta and the stone itself. So I tend to work all the way through like that. So your first pass leaves what we call one finger of stone over the whole thing, like you would pack an inch of snow or plaster over the whole thing. Just rough out straight. Then your next pass is within a width of a pencil. That's it. Because you don't want to leave any bruises in your finished work. And using the point, or what we call in Italian the subia, to rough things out with, it bruises the stone, but that bruise is not so deep. Your second pass, this is called, the first pass is roughing out. It's called abbozzatura. It makes an abbozzo. In other words, it removes all the extra stone. Say you're doing a portrait head with shoulders. You got these two big pieces of stone on either side. Those have to come off. And that's the first part of roughing out. And then the second part is modeling that form with the point in a very general way, leaving a finger's worth of material all over. You leave a finger in the front and two in the back, right? Because
you do that so that you have escape. Is that your escape?
That's right. You never undercut. There's ain't but two rules. Number one, don't break it. Number two, never undercut yourself. So that's what. And so your second pass is what we call smodellatura. When you're smodellare, that means you're taking it down one more level, which is the width of the pencil. That will remove any danger of bruises and take you that much closer to your final sculpture. But you're still, rather than one finger away, you're one pencil width away. And by then you're able to see it so much better.
Okay.
And again, the first points are very sparse, very few points, well spaced. The guy that taught me was named Vincenzo Donati, bless his memory. And he used to say, pochi punti ben spartiti, which means few points well spaced. And that's how you do it. And you use as few as you need, depending on what the subject is and your ability to see to do it by eye once you set up your point. So, and then your third pass, once you get the whole thing done within a pencil width, like all the way, the whole front, like say 3/4, not the back, and you take it down. The next level is the actual point on the surface. And so you have a fewer points at first, roughing out, a few more as you do the smodellatura, and then the final points are as many as you may need, to do what you're doing.
Oh, okay. And you referred to the front and the back. So if you're doing something in the round, you need to choose what's going to be your quote unquote front.
That's right. It's like, I mean, I generally work on figures.
Okay.
And they're always in the round.
Right.
But generally, you know the front of your composition, the sides of your composition, and and the back of it, whatever it is. But yes, you can, if you're doing something, say, abstract or something like that, that doesn't really have a front or back, you just pick one.
Right. Interesting. Do you do the entire form to the finger width and then the entire form to the pencil? Or do you work on things progressively?
Well, you generally, marble carving, the way I learned it, is generally done from top to bottom and front to back.
Okay.
But to answer your question, do you start to go further with one part, say, like finish up a piece and then go to the next one?
Right. Yeah.
People do all kinds of things.
Okay.
It doesn't, that just depends on how you see it. But in terms of what I was taught, best practices were that you do not do that, that you tend to see the whole sculpture at once. In other words, you rough it all out.
Okay.
Then you do the whole smodellatura with the points, or with one pencil width away.
Okay.
That way you have to see your whole sculpture, and you get rid of all the excess stone.
Okay.
But except for that bit. And then from there you begin to set your surface points all the way down. So that's the third pass. In other words, they say you make 4 passes, right? You rough it out, smodellare, and then point up, and then finish. And obviously there's a little more to it than that, but simply those are the 4 passes you make over the sculpture. And you try to keep it generally all about the same all over. So, I mean, what you're doing is you're making a work of art. You got to see the whole thing, and you're making decisions about that all the time.
Okay.
So I tend to try to see it all. Sometimes, say, like I'm working on a portrait right now, the bottom half of the portrait where it's going to be finished out, I haven't necessarily decided how that's going to be yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm finishing up for the face and the hair, and that point below the throat, I've sort of left like with the one pencil away, just with the unyato. And I'll get to that once I'm able to see it. So the thing is, you want to see your work and you want to create it like you wish. And I find that only doing one piece in one part and then leaving the other behind doesn't help. So I don't advise that.
Okay. Huh. Wow. Cool. Thank you. And so quick question. Somebody sent me a video a while ago when there was that what was the exhibit at the National Gallery with the little maquettes? Canova. There was a Canova exhibit. And you made a video of doing a replica of a Canova piece, and you were using a plumb line. Can you explain that process versus the machinetta? And do you use those in combination, or do you use one or the other? And what is that, the plumb line process?
No, what happened there with the National Gallery was they wanted me to copy that Canova, and they wanted me to do it with Canova's techniques. Okay. And so, contrary to what anybody says, the hard truth is that Canova didn't use the machinetta. He did not have one. The machinetta was created in England by 2 different sculptors at the same time.
Oh.
Yes, and so you can look this up. One was named Bacon, and there was another name too. But these things were more like real machines. They were not what we have today. And one of those guys was actually friendly with Canova and sent him instructions and everything to make them, but he didn't do it, apparently. much forging, and I don't know why. There
Uh-huh.
was the mechanics of it weren't able to be done in Rome at that time. That's what they say. Who knows? So I had to go back to finding out about the plumb line, which was a technique that I had actually never used. And as far as I know, no one has used it in 150 years,
Oh.
To carve marble with, because it is not, I mean, those artigiani back then were brilliant people. They just were amazing. And so I had frames built to reproduce that technique with the plumb line. And I told them that they wanted me to use the plumb line, then they wanted me to use the calipers, then I had to use a machinetta in order to get things done on time and also accurately.
Oh.
And you cannot go from one technique to another like that. That does not work
Uh-huh.
at all. When you start with one technique, you stay with that all the way through. So if you start with the calipers, you do the whole thing with the calipers. You start with the machinetta, you do the whole thing with the machinetta. And there was no way to actually do it all with the plumb lines accurately to make a copy like what they wanted. So I used the plumb lines and left that finger of stone I was talking to you about.
Oh.
Just to demonstrate the technique as far as their movie was concerned. And also leave myself enough stone so when I switched over to the calipers and then back to the machinetta, I would not be missing anything in the final piece.
Got it.
It's you have to understand, doing that was following what the filmmakers wanted to film.
Oh,
They
okay.
didn't understand I'm doing what they told me to do in the best way I know how.
Uh-huh.
When they first started out, they wanted me to
Right.
carve the whole life-size figure of that Venus, and I had 4 months. We didn't have a model, and we didn't have a block of marble. But
Wow, okay.
fortunately, the curator there, the man in charge, his name is Mr. C.D. Dickerson, and he's really smart, and he knows things. And so when he and I got together discussing things, he was able to understand that we could do what we needed to be done in the time that he needed it to be done, but we had to reduce the project down from miracle to possible. So he was great, really cooperative. They all were, both them and the people at the Art Institute of Chicago. They were terrific, and it was great to work with them, and we did get it done. But yeah, we had a lot of filming, and so the plumb line is something that I looked up a book by a guy named Francesco Carradori, which has since been translated into English by a friend of mine named Matt Alvin. You can find him online. He's a superb sculptor. We knew each other in Italy. Anyway, he translated into English. But before I knew about that, I found this book written in 1802 and translated the part I needed on the plumb line so I could understand what was going on, because all we had was some engravings of what that looked like. There was no explanation of how it was used. And even though Carradori made an explanation, believe me, once you start doing this stuff, there's a lot of little things that are left out you have to figure out for yourself. So yes, I used the plumb line enough to be able to make the video they wanted, and then as soon as possible, and I did that with the calipers too a little bit, and then as soon as possible got to the machinetta so I could create the copy.
Okay.
And it worked out all right in the end. They got what they wanted. And the piece, the final piece, is actually at the National Gallery now somewhere.
Oh, well, I have a question about
Cool.
plumb line.
Hey, Matthew, I'm sorry. You can ask questions in just a minute, but I have one more question. So, Fred, for our listeners, could you just give an overview of how would you make a sculpture from a model using a plumb line versus how would you make a sculpture from a model using the calipers versus with the machinetta? Because you referred to the 3 different methods, but just an overview
First
of
of
what that
all,
looks like.
Yeah. I wouldn't use a plumb line at all.
Okay.
Okay.
But that's
The
basically where you like hang it down and then you judge horizontal distances based on a plumb line.
No, the plumb line I wouldn't use at all.
Okay.
It's slow and it's not. In other words, you're trying to hold the stick at the right angle to a string at the perfect distance. It's very difficult. I'm sure those people in the 1800s were extremely well practiced.
Okay.
No, I just would just eliminate the plumb line. In fact, like us, I've never seen it done other than just trying to do it myself. So the calipers are used basically for when you want to enlarge a piece of sculpture. And the machinetta is used for a one-to-one transfer.
Okay.
So there's a very big difference there. And the calipers are complex. They take a long time to learn. And it takes, for every point you take on the sculpture, you have to use 3 different measurements on the calipers. And that takes a lot of practice, a long time to learn and a long time to do. And you just cannot get paid for the hours you spend to do that, to make that kind of enlargement. So I would tend, like if someone asked me to make a life-size sculpture or 8-foot sculpture, whatever figure, I prefer going ahead and making the model the same size as I want the sculpture and then using the machinetta to do a one-to-one transfer. And I do that because it's just faster. And you'd be surprised what happens when you make, say, a 28-inch model and you want to enlarge that to, 7-8 feet. There's a big change in what happens when you're taking a little small measurement with your calipers and enlarging it and putting. It's the difference between carving a life-size eye or a life-size mouth or a half life-size eye and a 3 times enlargement of that same eye. Things change dramatically.
So just to understand the calipers, you take a measurement of the model with a set of calipers. Do you then convert that with math, or is there a mechanical conversion that happens?
Oh no, you don't use math.
Okay, so I don't understand how the calipers work then. So you can set it to the scale that you want to expand it to.
Right. Well, that's called, basically it's non-Euclidean spherical geometry, and you don't need math. What you do is you take the measurement of, first of all, if you're doing just a 2 times or 3 times enlargement, you just use a straight line. You just use your calipers and mark it off 1, 2, or 3, whatever you want. But if you're just doing, say you have a block of marble in a model, you create a triangle. It's by using the measurements off of the model and the marble, and they don't have to have any particular numbers. You create a triangle just using your calipers. And I would have to show you how to do that, depending on whether your enlargement is under 2 times or over. Depends on how you set that triangle up. And what you're doing is setting it up so you can use a tangent in one system. And there's another system where you don't need to use the tangent. In other words, it's very difficult to explain in words. I could show you and you would understand it immediately. But there's a couple of 3 different methods to determine your ratio of enlargement depending on how big you want it to be. But it's not about math at all. Most of the artigiani that the guys I work with, most of these guys and there are hardly any of them left anymore. They started working in those studios when they were children. They got through enough grade school to learn to read and write and do basic mathematics. And by the time they were 13, 11, 12, 13, they were working in these studios. And couldn't possibly know anything about trigonometry. Neither do I.
So you said that you're working on a portrait right now. When you could you walk us through that process? When you start with the portrait, do you start with photographs, or do you build your model off of? Does someone sit for your model on this project?
Well, when I do a portrait, I have to use photographs, but I try to use them as little as possible and very judiciously. In this particular, if I have made a portrait entirely from photographs, but I'd rather have the person come and sit for me. And if they sit for me, I do a few steps. The first session, I generally do a drawing. It's sort of a map of their proportions. It's not a full-tone drawing of them. It's more like what we call a construction. So you know how far the size of their head, in other words, the proportion of the width to the height, where their eyes fit, how far wide their eyes are, where their nose and mouth is, all the proportions of their face. I just make sure I'm seeing that both from the front and from the profile. In other words, how far is it from the nose to the notch in the ear, from the eye to the notch in the ear, corner of the mouth, and so forth. So I program myself with those proportions, and I have it on paper. And then I have them sit for me, and I model a clay. I'll take photographs and say of profiles and three-quarter views. And then I'll model a clay from that point to get it roughed out, get a pretty close likeness to what I think from the information that I have. And then I have them come back, and they sit for me so I can finish it. All this has to be done on approval by your client.
Right.
And so they have to see themselves in this portrait when it's a portrait. If it's a figure, they have to see themselves in a figure. And if they do, then good, But all those little details, like, the difference in one side of the face to the other, how one eye looks, or, there's a lot going on in a person's face. And so I tend to I prefer to have them there. If it's a portrait of someone that's no longer alive, then you do the best you can with the photographs you can get. But I make a clay model. I make a plaster waste mold of the clay and a plaster cast from the mold, and then use the plaster cast with the machinetta to get to the marble. And then once I'm finishing the marble, I can take a look if I have a question, like right now, trying to attach the hair to the forehead and stuff like that. I'll take another look at that photograph, see if when I did the clay, maybe there's something I can do to improve it, or I didn't see, or you constantly have to be critical of your work.
So if you make a waste mold, then what happens if you screw up your cast? Do you have to start over?
You don't screw up.
You just...
Bam.
That's a scary step, isn't it?
And we have to ask, do you work primarily by hand or with pneumatic tools?
I use both.
And how do you decide when to use which one?
I mean, you can't rough out with pneumatics, so that's all done by hand. So I interchange. I'm working both with pneumatics and by hand, back and forth all the time, particularly in the finishing part. Some of this modulatura with Unetto, I do mostly with pneumatic tools, but once that's done, when I'm both beginning and the end of the work is all done with both. I've used a lot of hand techniques.
Why can't you rough out with the pneumatics?
Well, because the air hammer is not strong enough.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
You've got a lot more power in your arm and the hammer, the tool, than you do on that pneumatic hammer.
Oh, interesting.
The pneumatic hammer, no one uses that with a point, the subia.
Fred, have you always been into, loved the figurative sculpture?
Oh, always? No. In fact, I went to art school in San Francisco, and before I got to the figure, I was doing all different kinds of sculpture. I did conceptual artwork, I did mixed media, I did welding, and I did abstract sculpture in wood and stone. And this was up until, I did this for a few years, really, until I got to Italy and realized that I didn't know what I was doing. And I had to start all over again. And it's not like I couldn't I'm making an abstract sculpture for a person right now, actually. It's not like I can't do it. I can, but I prefer the figure because of the challenges involved and because what I have to say and with visually has to do with human expression, and I believe that you can say that best with a figure than with a non-figurative word. So I've chosen to try to learn the figure and learn how to carve it.
So I was really surprised to see on your website, you mentioned that you studied with Nerina Simi, right?
Yes.
And so I went to the Florence Academy of Art, and they traced their lineage. I believe that the founder of the Florence Academy also studied with Nerina Simi, and she was referred to as, maybe I'm getting my people mixed up, but wasn't she in a lineage of oil painters who kind of trace themselves back? So you're the recipient of both the figurative oil painting tradition and the stone carving living tradition. Is that right?
There's a big difference between the Florence Academy and the Simi Studio.
Okay.
And the guy that founded the Florence Academy was named Daniel Graves.
Right.
He's still around. He's a superb painter. He studied very briefly with Miss Simi, not much, but not very much at all. Those people come from another. All of this starts with Jean-Léon Gérôme.
Okay.
And so Philadelphia Simi was a student of Jean-Léon Gérôme, and he taught Miss Simi. She taught us. And in Daniel Graves' case, I think he learned from someone named Richard Lack. And that school also came from Gérôme's student who taught him, who taught Daniel, and that became the Florence Academy. And he was very successful with that method of teaching. I studied with Miss Simi for 4 years to learn how to draw, to learn the figure, and because sculpture is drawing, and you got to be able to draw. And I'm not the greatest at it. It's a real challenge for me, but I do better in 3 dimensions than in 2. However, I'm able to draw enough to, if a client asks me to, you've got to be able to, people talk to you. They say, I want this or that. But the linear language that we speak and the visual language that we see are 2 different languages. So it's very hard. Generally, when I was working with a client, I try to get something down on paper, give them the choices of a visual concept, and then we can work together because we're in the same language. So drawing is super important. The Florence Academy is an excellent school. It still is. Right now, the Lamb Academy of Fine Arts has been taken over by a former Florence Academy person named Jordan Sokol. And they're teaching those methods. and it's terrific that students learn really, really well, and they have superb teachers there, both for sculpture and drawing and painting. But no, it's two different branches that came from Jerome. One's one and one with the other way. But the Florence Academy does a lot of work with site size, and they do a lot of work by putting plaster model in a black box and doing full tone studies that way. We didn't do that. Miss Simi has used a measuring technique with your eye and a stick. We did not do site size, and we did draw from the plaster model a lot, but not in the same way. We didn't put it in a box and didn't light it like that. We do use natural light.
Okay.
And so yes, I owe a great deal to Miss Simi. Everything I do is based on two different things. And one was her teaching, and the other was the work in the Marvel Studios as an apprentice.
And did your interest in human figure, did that come from your time with Nerina Simi, or was that something you already knew that you wanted to do, and so you sought her out?
Well, yeah, when I found out that I came to the figure through carving marble, actually.
Oh, okay.
Because when I first went into the studio when I went to Italy, I worked at RO Studios for about 8 months. And the people that were working there, it was Giulio Cardini and a guy named Primo and a guy named Sauro Lorenzoni. Sauro is still alive and working. Giulio Cardini was Henry Moore's chief carver.
Oh, wow.
And yes, and at the time, Henry Studio was producing work for Moore and Marino Marini and all the most famous artists that you can think of that were doing stone sculpture. And so I was making non-figurative work at the time and watching these guys. And when I saw that they could do anything, it didn't matter what it was. And also by going around the other studios in Pietrasanta in the area, I saw someone in one studio making a copy of the Apollo and Daphne by Bernini. And I was just stopped, cold. I was like, I couldn't believe that you could actually do that. I mean, okay, I can get it that back in the 1600s, Bernini and his crew could do it. But to do it today in the studio in Pietrasanta, I was amazed. It was literally a shock. And I said, if I can learn to do that, I can make anything I want. And so everything changed at that point. I went back to Henro and picked up a machinetta. And those guys started helping me using it. And I learned, and then they could see that my interest was different. And Mr. Cardini introduced me to Enzo Pasquini, which was not too far away in Crocette. He had a studio, and that studio was specialized in making classical copies. And I was like, oh, yeah. So dumb America. Took me a little while to figure out I had to take what I was doing was just not getting it. And when I finally realized that I had to take a model down on the shelf and try to use the machinetta and do what they were doing so that we were both on the same page, then things started over again. So I was just copying plaster figures and then, of course, deciding to hire models and try to make my own figures. And that's what led me to Miss Simi, because I didn't really have any instruction in drawing or figure modeling at that point. It's possible to learn it all by yourself, but it takes you a long time and it's really hard.
How many of those studios are still active?
The Simi studio?
just in that region of Italy, how are all those studios still active, or has there been
No, not at all, not at all. Someone asked me that same question last time I went to Italy, and I researched it while I was there. There are only about, now I don't know about everywhere, but in Pietrasanta, there's only about 8 or maybe 10 at most figurative studios that are capable of producing high-quality classical copies, figurative sculpture. And in those studios, most of them, there's only 2 of them that have like 10 workers. And there's Cervietti and Galeni, and they both have workers, but not all of those guys are carvers, right? So in all of the 8 or 10 studios, if that's how many there are, and there's certainly no more than that, there may be a total of maybe 40 people that are still capable of doing that kind of high quality reproduction of figurative work. Yeah, and when you compare that to Palace Studio, back in the 1900s, there was 125 people working in one single studio.
Wow.
Are any of the people that are in those studios, are they young? Are they replenishing the carvers, or is it an aging group?
No, it's unfortunate. There are some young people now, of course, due to the internet. There's marble carving has kind of taken on an interest for people. But at a professional level like that, there are very few. And the reason is robots.
Oh.
So you don't have anybody that's an abbozzatore anymore. You don't have any more smodellatores anymore. They don't exist anymore. You can't even get a blacksmith to make your tools anymore. It's really different. So the studios are going to using robots for a lot of this work. However, it is true there are and still are great people out there, artigiani, that know the old methods and are using them all the time, because not everybody wants to have their work done by a robot, and not all work can even be done by a robot. Certainly all the finishing work is done by hand, although I will say the technology has gotten a lot better and is really sophisticated. But you'll be amazed. You see some of the things these things do. But it's still a robot. And the people that run them often you don't need to know anything anymore. All you have to have is money. You know, you can call up on the phone, tell them what you want, and they'll make it. They'll carve it. They'll send it to you. It'll be just fine if that's what you want to do. But if you're like us and you want to perform your own artwork, perform your carving, your modeling, and your drawing, and use yourself, then it's not even conceivable to use a robot. You want to use yourself.
Is there an understanding that, or maybe this isn't necessarily true, but is there an understanding that part of the learning process was doing those early stages, the rough passes, that's how you learned to be capable of doing the final passes that the robot can't do? Is that something that's being thought about, or is that not an issue?
Well, I don't know. I see that some carvers have to go to automation simply because these other people non-exist. But believe me, that stuff is very expensive. And the problem is that for somebody even like myself or any young student that can't afford to do that, I just was working with a guy who wanted an estimate to do a 32-inch eye, very realistic lion with his paws up and everything. They wanted $26,000
to do it by robot or by hand.
by robot.
By robot, okay.
Uh,
Finished it. And when you think, well, could you do that? Would it take you that much time and effort to do it? It probably would. So sometimes it doesn't matter. The money you spend and the work you're going to get, sometimes the robot is fine, and depending on the project and depending on the budget. Sometimes it's not. I couldn't. I only done one robot project, and I had a client that wanted a perfect egg. And she wanted the egg to stand on the end, like stand up, like an egg doesn't do. So I got that done by a robot, and I just did all the final finishing and polishing, and it came out beautiful, but it was an egg. So if you think about carving an egg with templates and going around it, trying to make it all perfect, and also it was an enlargement, it had to be a particular egg, it came out that it was much more economical, both time and financially, to use a robot.
Interesting.
And so sometimes, for instance, allowed for architectural carving, if you're going to make a Corinthian capital for buildings and you need 6 of them, give it to the robot. It's going to work 24/7 and do just fine.
I see that. Are you on the faculty at the Lime Academy?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm
But
sorry.
I see that you're
was.
teaching a workshop
Yes.
in August there.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, it's a 6-day workshop. Like what do you try to communicate in 6 days? Like how do you go about trying to teach carving techniques in that amount of time?
Right. Well, these people were all beginning carvers. They'd never carved before, or very little. So I start out like where I began at the beginning, where the Italians began, frankly, and we carve what they call a mortaio, mortar, like for a mortar and pestle. And I also used limestone, and that's one of the nice things about the Guild. I was able to get the limestone from the Coppolas, and they sent really good quality stuff to Lime Academy for us to work with. I start with limestone and a basic set of tools with these people so they can learn about how to use the point, the two chisel, the unetto, and how to use templates and, calipers, and at least get them going on carving methods and how to develop a shape out of the block. In other words, by removing rather than by modeling. And so we all did these mortars, but I make them fairly big. They're not small ones. They're usually we start out with maybe a block that's 12 by 10 by 10 or 12 by 12 by 12, something like that, so that they're big enough for them to really get into the material and use the tools. So that workshop was about, and I've done this several times, actually. The mortar is a really good project for beginning carvers. And limestone works better than marble in that case because it's not nearly as hard, and you can get results in that amount of time. People don't necessarily finish the thing, but they know how to when they take it out away. They've got it far enough along and have learned so many different things. It's I've also taught a workshop with the machinetta. That's a little more difficult.
I'm just curious what I think maybe I can imagine why, but I'm curious why you think the mortar is such a good.
Well, the mortar is a traditional Italian method. I mean, there's pictures of. I know one place in Livignani has a museum. They have a beautiful glass case with all these different type of mortars that people have carved. And it was just something the Italians used as an entry-level project for people that were going to learn to carve, because you learn a great deal by doing that.
So are you going to be continuing to teach workshops at the Lime Academy then?
Well, I hope so. What they're trying to do is set up a stone carving department there
Oh.
and build a studio, which is not done yet. And we're also trying to take people to Italy, and we're exploring all of those things. So I'll be teaching there again in terms of workshops. But to tell you the truth, I taught at Lamb Academy before for about 5 or 6 years, back when the founders, the older people that were there, Elizabeth Gordon Chandler and Lacey DeGirende, were still running the studio and still working. They hired me to come and begin to teach waste molds and rubber molds and stone carving. And I did until the administration, they passed away, and then the administration, their school disappeared. It wasn't well administered after them. It was for a while, but not for too long. Sharon and Hank Hunter took it over from when Elizabeth Gordon Chandler was still alive, and they did a very good job. But after that, the people that followed up ran the school in the ground, and it disappeared. And now this man from the Florence Academy, had the Florence Academy in New Jersey, Jordan Sokol, has restored it. And another man named Michael Duffy, the chairman of their board, they've really done an amazingly good job in bringing that school back, because the studios, the actual physical plant is superb. But they're going to set up both the bronze foundry and this carving studio, and I'll be involved in the carving studio part.
Wow, cool. So if people are interested in learning, they can go to the Lime Academy website and hopefully
that's
be able to sign up for stuff like that.
Yeah, it's not happening. It's happening, but slowly.
Got it.
And I'm not going to be a full-time teacher. I don't really have time for that. And I've never really wanted to just devote so much time to teaching. I really enjoy it. And I'm actually quite dedicated to passing on marble carving. It's a dying art form, and I hate to see it go, particularly on our watch, So I really want to teach, and I'm excited about the possibility. And Chad Fisher, who's the head of the sculpture department there, is excited about it, and he's doing a really good job with bronze casting and the figure. When I add this in, probably, but I'll be teaching workshops again there. They're just not scheduled yet.
Cool.
So yeah.
Fred, you shouldn't refer to it as don't say it's a dying art. It's not going to die. It's not dying. That's what we're doing.
Well,
it's not dead yet.
Well, we are doing it. Yes,
That's right. That's right.
It's changing.
Right. Yeah.
We need to train people. We need to have more people involved at a certain level.
Yeah.
You can look around. You can look around on the internet. You're going to find a lot of interest in marble carving, but it's at a certain level. It's not the professional level, for instance, of the Stone Carvers Guild. There are people having fun. They're having a good time. They're making things. And they make some nice things. It's not that. But making a living doing this, as you well know, is real different than just making sculpture for your own pleasure. Sure.
Well, we're so grateful that, thank you so much for coming on and for passing on your knowledge. And,
before we sign off, I just want to congratulate you, Fred, on the award from the National Sculpture Society that you just received.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. As I said to them, we're descended in what we do really from ancient Greece, even though the Sculpture Society was from 1893. And in ancient Greece, the most satisfying award that one could get would be recognition from one's peers, one's fellow carvers, one's colleagues, the people that know the most about it. And so really seriously appreciated the recognition from them, because the National Sculpture Society has a lot of extremely fine sculptors. Not so many marble carvers, but great sculpture.
Well, thank you again, Fred. This has been really enjoyable and educational. To
we
talk
really
with you
appreciate
about
it.
this stuff. And
I want to talk more about paper hat history sometime. So
well, we'll
have you back.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we all need to get together again, that's for sure.
You've been listening to the Stone Carvers Guild podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you will find us online at stonecarversguild.org. There you can find photos showing some of the things that we discussed today, additional information about our guest, and if you're so inclined, ways to get more involved with the Guild and our ongoing activities. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, we hope that you will subscribe and rate us on the podcaster of your choice. 5 stars, please. We'll be back in a month with a new episode, so until then, keep your hammer up and your chisel sharp.